The first Zero came out of the sun like a falling star, its engine screaming a death song that made my blood freeze. Through the salt spray and smoke, I watched it dive toward our task force, knowing that somewhere in that cockpit sat a young man who had already written his own obituary. The kamikaze's wings caught the morning light for just a moment before our 5-inch guns opened up, filling the sky with deadly black flowers of flak. This was April 16, 1945, off the coast of Okinawa, and the Japanese Empire was throwing everything it had left at us in one final, desperate gamble. I'm standing here on the bridge wing of the USS Laffey, a Fletcher-class destroyer serving as a radar picket ship, watching death approach from every direction. My name doesn't matter now. I was just one of 300 sailors aboard this tin can, floating 15 miles north of Okinawa like bait on a hook. Our job was simple in theory, terrifying in practice. Stay out here alone, watch our radar screens, and give the fleet early warning when the kamikazes came. And they always came. The morning had started quietly enough. I'd been on watch since 0400, scanning the empty Pacific horizon through binoculars while our radar operators hunched over their glowing screens below. The sun was just climbing over the edge of the world when Seaman Johnson called out from the radar room. Contact. Multiple bogies bearing 270, range 50 miles and closing fast. Captain Becton's voice crackled over the ship's intercom. General quarters. General quarters. All hands man your battle stations. This is not a drill. The alarm klaxon split the morning air, and suddenly our quiet ship exploded into organized chaos. Sailors poured out of hatches, racing to their stations. Gun crews scrambled up ladders to the 5-inch mounts, while others rushed to the 20 and 40 millimeter anti-aircraft guns that bristled from every available space on our superstructure. The smell of coffee and bacon from the galley was instantly replaced by the sharp scent of cordite as we began loading ammunition. I took my position at the port 20 millimeter gun, checking the ammunition belts one more time. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. This would be my 4th kamikaze attack since we'd taken station at Radar Picket Station One a week ago. We'd been lucky so far. Only minor damage, a few wounded. But our luck couldn't hold forever. Bogies now at 30 miles, still closing. Johnson's voice was tight with tension. Count shows 20-plus aircraft, various altitudes, 20 planes. All of them loaded with bombs, all of them piloted by men who had no intention of returning home. The Japanese called them Takotai, special attack units, but we had a simpler name for them. Suicide pilots. Death from above. Captain Becton's voice came over the intercom again, calm and professional despite what was bearing down on us. This is the captain speaking. We have multiple kamikaze aircraft approaching from the west. All gun crews prepared to engage. Remember your training, boys. Steady shooting, and we'll get through this together. I could see them now, dark specks against the blue sky, growing larger by the second. Behind me, our 5-inch guns began tracking, the heavy barrels swinging toward the approaching enemy. The fire control radar had locked on, and I could hear the electrical whine of the gun directors as they calculated range, speed, and deflection. Here they come, somebody shouted. The first wave hit us like a thunderbolt. 6 Zeros and Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters came screaming in from different directions, their engines pushed to maximum power. The lead Zero was diving almost vertically, its pilot having spotted us from miles away. These weren't random attacks. They were coordinated, planned, and executed with the kind of precision that only desperate men could achieve. Our 5-inch guns opened fire first, filling the sky with explosive shells that burst into black puffs of smoke and shrapnel. The sound was deafening, a rapid boom, boom, boom that hammered at my eardrums and made the entire ship shudder. Spent shell casings rang like bells as they hit the deck. The lead Zero flew straight through the flak, pieces of his wings being torn away by shrapnel. But he kept coming, his nose pointed directly at our bridge. I could see the red rising sun painted on his wings, could almost make out the pilot's face behind his goggles. All guns concentrate on the leader, Captain Becton ordered. Every 20 and 40 millimeter gun on the ship swung toward the diving Zero. The air around him erupted in tracers. Red American rounds and bright white Japanese returned fire as his wing guns blazed away at us. Bullets banged off our steel deck and superstructure, sending up showers of sparks. Suddenly, the Zero's engine caught fire. Black smoke began streaming from his cowling, and I saw pieces of his propeller spinning away. But he kept coming, kept diving, even as flames engulfed his cockpit. The pilot was probably already dead, but his plane was still a guided missile aimed at our heart. At the last second, the burning Zero rolled to the right and crashed into the sea just 50 yards off our starboard bow. The explosion sent a column of water and steam high into the air, and burning gasoline spread across the waves like a fiery blanket. "Splash one," someone yelled, but there was no time to celebrate. 5 more kamikazes were boring in from different directions, and our guns were already swinging to engage them. A Ki-43 Oscar came in low and fast from our port quarter, skimming just above the wave tops to avoid our radar. I tracked him with my 20mm, leading his flight path and squeezing the trigger in short bursts. My tracers stitched across the water, then walked up and into his engine. The Oscar shuddered, trailing smoke, but kept coming. Next to me, gunner's mate Peterson was working his 40mm like a man possessed, pumping shells into another Zero that was diving from high altitude. "Come on, you son of a," he shouted over the gunfire. "Come and get some." The Oscar I'd been shooting had suddenly exploded in a ball of orange fire just 100 yards away. His bomb went off in midair, sending a concussion wave that knocked 2 of our sailors off their feet and cracked several windows on the bridge. Burning wreckage rained down on our deck, but the damage control teams were already moving with fire hoses and foam. "Shoot down, 4 to go." Captain Beckton's voice remained steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. The third kamikaze was a twin-engine bomber, a Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally, that had somehow made it through our combat air patrol. He was coming in from dead ahead, flying just above the water in a shallow dive that would bring him right into our forward gun mount. The pilot was good. He kept jinking left and right, making it hard for our gunners to get a solid lock. Our forward 5-inch mount fired 3 quick rounds, the shells exploding just ahead of the Sally's nose. The bomber flew through the smoke and debris, but I could see that he was hurt. His port engine was smoking, and pieces of his wing were missing. At 300 yards, every gun we had opened fire on him. 20mm, 40s, even rifle fire from the Marines on the fantail. The Sally was flying through a wall of lead and steel, and somehow he was still coming. I could see the pilot hunched over his controls, probably wounded, definitely dying, but still fighting to complete his mission. At 100 yards, our gunfire finally found its mark. The Sally's fuel tank exploded, turning the entire aircraft into a flying torch. But his momentum carried him forward, and for one terrible moment I thought he was going to hit us anyway. Instead, the burning bomber cartwheeled over our forward gun mount and crashed into the sea off our starboard side. The explosion sent another geyser of water into the air, and more burning fuel spread across the waves. 3 down, Peterson shouted, ejecting an empty ammunition clip from his 40mm. "Come on, you bastards. Who's next?" The 4th and 5th kamikazes attacked together, trying to overwhelm our defenses with a coordinated assault. 1 Zero came in from the port beam, while another Oscar dove from high altitude on our starboard side. It was the kind of attack that had sunk dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign. Too many targets, not enough time to deal with them all. But we'd learned a few tricks during our weeks on picket duty. Captain Beckton ordered hard left rudder, swinging our stern away from the Zero while presenting our starboard guns with a better angle on the Oscar. At the same time, he called in our ace in the hole. "Sundog leader, this is Laffey. We have 2 bandits inbound, need immediate assistance." "Roger, Laffey. We see them, we're on it." 4 Grumman F6F Hellcat fighters came diving out of the sun like avenging angels. They'd been circling high above us, part of the combat air patrol that tried to protect the picket ships. But there were never enough of them, and too many kamikazes always got through. The lead Hellcat opened fire on the diving Oscar with his 650 caliber machine guns, sending a stream of tracers into the enemy bomber's cockpit. The Oscar began smoking immediately, his dive becoming erratic as the pilot fought for control. Meanwhile, we were dealing with the Zero attacking from port. He was coming in fast and low, his pilot clearly experienced. Our port side guns were hammering at him, but he was weaving and dodging, making himself a difficult target. At 500 yards, I could see the kamikaze pilot's face clearly through his canopy. He looked young, maybe 19 or 20, about the same age as my kid brother back in Iowa. For just a moment, our eyes met across the shrinking distance, and I saw something that surprised me. Not hatred, not fanaticism, but a kind of sad resignation. This boy didn't want to die, but he was going to do it anyway because his country and his emperor had asked him to. I squeezed the trigger on my 20mm and sent a long burst into his engine. The Zero shuddered and began trailing black smoke, but he kept coming. Behind him, the Hellcat that had been chasing the Oscar had finished his target and was now diving on the Zero. The Navy pilot's 650s chewed into the Kamikaze's tail and wings, sending pieces flying. But the Zero was too close. Even wounded and burning, he was going to hit us. "Brace for impact," Captain Beckton shouted over the intercom. I grabbed onto the gun mount and held on tight, watching the Zero grow larger in my vision. He was aiming for our bridge, trying to take out our command and control. If he succeeded, we'd be dead in the water for the next wave. At the last second, the Zero's engine seized up completely. The sudden loss of power caused his nose to drop, and instead of hitting our bridge, he slammed into the water just 20 feet short of our hull. The explosion rocked our ship violently, shattering windows and knocking men down all over the deck. Burning fuel washed up against our port side, but our damage control teams were already fighting the fire with foam and water. "That's 5, Peterson yelled, reloading his 40mm. 5 kills, no hits. How do you like them apples, Tojo?" But even as we celebrated, I could see more dots appearing on the horizon. The second wave was coming in, and this one looked bigger than the first. "Radar reports 15 plus bogeys, bearing 340, range 40 miles. Johnson called from the radar room. His voice was getting hoarse from all the shouting, but he never missed a contact. 15 more kamikazes, all aimed at our little task force of 3 destroyers and a few smaller escort vessels. The Japanese were throwing everything they had at Okinawa, trying to stop our invasion by sinking the ships that supported it. They'd already damaged or sunk dozens of vessels with their suicide attacks, and they weren't going to stop until they'd spent every plane and pilot they had. This second wave was different, though. More organized, better coordinated. As they got closer, I could see that they were flying in tight formation, with experienced pilots leading groups of newer ones. These weren't desperate, half-trained kids. These were veterans, the last of the Imperial Navy's skilled aviators, making their final flight. "All stations, this is the captain," Beckton's voice came over the intercom. "Second wave incoming. Ammunition report, all guns." The gun crews called in their status. We were down to about 60% of our anti-aircraft ammunition, but still had plenty of 5-inch shells for the main battery. More importantly, our guns were all operational and our crew was holding together well. No panic, no breaking under pressure, just professional sailors doing their jobs. The second wave came in at different altitudes, making it harder for us to concentrate our fire. 6 planes dove from high altitude, while 6 more came in on the deck, skimming just above the wave tops. The remaining 3 took a middle altitude, probably planning to hit us during the confusion of the high and low attacks. Our 5-inch guns engaged the high-altitude group first, filling the sky with exploding shells. I watched one Zero take a direct hit and simply disintegrate, pieces of wing and fuselage spinning away in all directions. Another plane, a twin-engine Betty bomber, flew through the flak, but emerged trailing smoke from both engines. The low-level group was coming fast, using a technique the Japanese had perfected during months of kamikaze attacks. They stayed just above the water until the last moment, then pulled up into a steep climb that would bring them down on top of us. It was hard to track them with our guns, and even harder to hit them. "Low group, port bow," I called out, swinging my 20mm toward the approaching planes. 6 aircraft, Zeros, Oscars, and what looked like a Judy dive bomber, all racing toward us at wave top level. Our port side guns opened up, sending streams of tracers out to meet them. The lead Zero flew straight through our fire, pieces flying off his wings, but his engine still running strong. Then the Hellcats arrived again. Sundog leader engaging low group, came the calm voice of the Navy fighter pilot. "Tally ho, tally ho." 4 F6F Hellcats dove into the group of kamikazes like hawks scattering sparrows. Their 50 caliber machine guns ripped into the tightly packed formation, and suddenly the sky was full of burning airplanes and falling debris. The lead Hellcat caught the first Zero head-on, his 6 guns converging on the Kamikaze's engine and cockpit. The Zero exploded in a fireball that seemed to hang in the air for a moment before plummeting into the sea. The second Hellcat got the Oscar, sending it cartwheeling into the water in a shower of sparks and smoke. But 4 kamikazes were still coming, and they were splitting up to attack us from different angles. One Zero peeled off toward our stern, while a Judy dive bomber continued straight for our bridge. The other 2, another Zero, and what looked like a Val dive bomber, were heading for our engine room amidships. Multiple targets, all guns engaged, Captain Beckton ordered. Our ship became a floating volcano of anti-aircraft fire. Every gun we had was shooting, filling the air with tracers and explosions. The sound was incredible, a continuous roar of gunfire mixed with the screaming of aircraft engines and the explosion of shells. I tracked the Zero heading for our stern, leading him with my 20mm and firing in short, controlled bursts. My tracers reached out across the water and walked up into his belly, sparking and ricocheting off his armor plating. The Zero shuddered but kept coming, his pilot probably wounded but still fighting. Next to me, Peterson had switched to the Judy bomber that was diving on our bridge. His 40mm shells were exploding all around the diving plane, but somehow it was still flying, still diving, still aimed at our heart. The Val dive bomber attacking our engine room took a direct hit from our forward 5-inch mount and simply disappeared in a cloud of smoke and flying metal. Our aft mount got the second Zero with a perfectly timed shot that caught him just as he was pulling out of his dive. The explosion lit up the morning sky like a miniature sun. That left the Zero I was shooting at and the Judy that Peterson was trying to stop. Both planes were badly damaged, both pilots probably dying, but they were still coming. The Zero had lost most of his port wing and was trailing a long stream of black smoke, but his engine was still running. The Judy's landing gear had dropped, probably from battle damage, and he was flying crooked, but he was in a perfect dive toward our bridge. "Come on," Peterson shouted, pumping shells into the Judy. "Go down, you." At 300 yards, the Judy's engine finally seized up. Without power, his dive became a glide, and instead of hitting our bridge, he was going to hit the water just short of our bow. But his bomb was still armed, and if it went off close enough, it could still damage us badly. The Judy hit the water 50 yards ahead of us and exploded, sending up a massive column of water and steam. The shock wave rocked our ship violently, and for a moment I thought we might capsize. But our destroyer held together, riding over the explosion and emerging on the other side battered, but still fighting. My Zero was still coming, though. Down to less than 200 yards now, still smoking, still flying, still trying to complete his mission. I could see the pilot slumped over his controls, probably unconscious from loss of blood, but his plane was locked in a shallow dive that would bring him right into our port side. I elevated my gun and fired a long burst directly into his engine. My armor-piercing rounds punched through his cowling and into his cylinder heads, and finally, his engine exploded in a gout of flame and oil. The Zero nosed over and hit the water just yards from our hull, close enough that burning gasoline splashed up onto our deck. "7 down," Peterson yelled, slapping me on the back. We got 'em all, but our celebration was short-lived. The high-altitude group was still coming, and they'd used the distraction of the low-level attack to get dangerously close. 4 planes were diving on us now, 3 Zeros and a twin-engine Francis bomber, all loaded with bombs and all piloted by men who had nothing left to lose. The Francis was the biggest threat. Twin-engine bombers carried heavier bomb loads, and if one hit us, it could break our back. Our 5-inch gun swung toward him, and I could see the gun crews working frantically to load and fire as fast as possible. The Francis took a hit in his port engine and began smoking heavily, but he kept coming. His pilot was flying straight and level now, no evasive maneuvers, just pointing his nose at our ship and holding the stick steady. This was a man who had accepted death and was determined to take us with him. At 800 yards, our forward 5-inch mount scored a direct hit on the Francis' nose. The explosion tore off his entire cockpit section, probably killing the pilot instantly. But the bomber's momentum carried it forward, and without anyone at the controls, it began an uncontrolled tumble toward the sea. The Francis hit the water 100 yards off our starboard beam and exploded like a small volcano. The shock wave shattered every piece of glass still left on our ship and knocked several sailors off their feet. Burning fuel spread across the waves, creating a fiery slick that drifted slowly away on the current. The 3 Zeros were still diving, though, and they were close enough now that I could see individual details on their aircraft. The lead plane had a white scarf trailing from his cockpit, probably a veteran pilot making his final flight with some ceremony. The second Zero had been painted with cherry blossoms, the traditional Japanese symbol of death and rebirth. The third plane was unmarked except for the red rising sun on his wings. Our anti-aircraft guns concentrated on the lead Zero, and within seconds his entire aircraft was surrounded by exploding shells and tracer rounds. Pieces of wing and fuselage flew off in all directions, but somehow he kept flying, kept diving, kept coming. At 400 yards, the lead Zero's fuel tank exploded. The entire aircraft became a flying torch, but it was still on course for our bridge. The pilot was certainly dead, but his plane was now a guided missile powered by burning gasoline and sheer momentum. "All hands brace for impact," Captain Beckton shouted. I wrapped my arms around my gun mount and held on tight, watching the burning Zero grow larger and larger in my vision. This was it. After surviving 7 kamikaze attacks, our luck had finally run out. But at the last second, a Hellcat appeared out of nowhere and slammed into the burning Zero from the side. The Navy pilot had sacrificed his own life to ram the kamikaze, and both planes exploded in a massive fireball just 100 yards off our port bow. Pieces of wreckage rained down on our deck, but the main explosion was far enough away to avoid serious damage. "Sundog 4 is down," came the quiet voice of another Hellcat pilot over the radio. "Lieutenant Morrison rammed the lead bandit. He's gone." A Navy pilot had just died to save our ship. I didn't know his name, didn't know where he was from, but he'd given his life for us. The weight of that sacrifice hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The remaining 2 Zeros were still diving, but they were running into the concentrated fire of every gun in our task force. The destroyer Barton, stationed a mile to our starboard, had joined the fight with her 5-inch guns. Even some of the smaller escort vessels were shooting, adding their 20 and 40 millimeter guns to the wall of fire filling the sky. The second Zero, the one with the cherry blossoms, took multiple hits and began breaking apart in midair. His wings folded up, his engine tore loose, and his fuselage tumbled end over end into the sea. There was no explosion, just pieces of metal and fabric sinking beneath the waves. The last Zero made it closest to us. He was diving almost vertically now, his engine screaming at maximum power, his pilot probably dead at the controls. Our guns were hitting him repeatedly, but he was too close to stop. At 100 feet altitude, the Zero's right wing came off completely. The sudden loss of lift caused him to roll violently to the right, and instead of hitting us amidships, he crashed into the sea just 20 feet off our starboard side. The underwater explosion was tremendous. It lifted our stern clear out of the water and slammed it back down again with a crash that I felt in my bones. Every rivet in our hull groaned under the stress, and for a terrifying moment I thought we might break in half. But we held together. American steel and American craftsmanship had taken everything the Japanese could throw at us and emerged victorious. Around us, the sea was littered with burning wreckage and oil slicks, but our ship was still afloat, still fighting, still ready for whatever came next. "Damage control report," Captain Beckton called over the intercom. The reports came in from all over the ship. Minor flooding in the forward compartments, some electrical damage from the shock waves, a few wounded sailors who'd been hit by flying debris. But our engines were still running, our guns were still operational, and our radar was still scanning the skies. We'd survived 22 kamikaze attacks in less than 2 hours. 22 desperate men had flown their aircraft into what they knew was certain death, and we'd stopped every single one of them. The sea around us was a graveyard of Japanese aircraft, but our task force was still intact, still protecting the invasion fleet anchored off Okinawa. As the morning wore on, more attacks came. Not as large as the first 2 waves, but still dangerous, single planes or small groups trying to slip through our defenses. Each time, our guns spoke and our Hellcats dove, and each time more Japanese aircraft joined the wreckage on the ocean floor. By noon, we'd counted 37 confirmed kills, aircraft shot down or crashed trying to attack our small task force. 37 young men who climbed into their cockpits that morning knowing they would never see another sunset. It was a staggering loss of life. And for what? They'd damaged a few ships, killed a few American sailors, but they hadn't stopped the invasion of Okinawa. They hadn't changed the course of the war. As I stood there on deck, surrounded by empty shell casings and the smell of cordite, I thought about those Japanese pilots. They'd been brave. You had to give them that. Flying into certain death took a special kind of courage, even if it was twisted by fanatic devotion to their emperor. Some of them had been my age, maybe younger. Boys who should have been going to school or working on their father's farms, not dying in the cockpits of burning airplanes. But they'd made their choice, and we'd made ours. We were here to end this war, to stop the killing once and for all. Every kamikaze we shot down was one less threat to our invasion fleet, one step closer to final victory. The Japanese could throw every plane and pilot they had at us, but American industry, American technology, and American fighting spirit would prevail in the end. The sun was setting over Okinawa when the last attack of the day came in. A single Zero, probably flown by the last pilot in his squadron, making one final desperate attempt to die for his emperor. Our radar picked him up at 20 miles, and our combat air patrol intercepted him at 10. I watched through binoculars as 2 Hellcats bracketed the lone kamikaze and shot him down into the sea. 41 kills for the day. 41 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 41 pilots dead, and our task force was still operational. It was a crushing defeat for the Japanese, a clear demonstration that their kamikaze tactics, no matter how fanatically executed, could not stop the American war machine. That night, as I stood watch under the stars, I thought about what I'd witnessed. The desperate courage of the kamikaze pilots, the professional skill of our gun crews, the sacrifice of Lieutenant Morrison and his Hellcat. All of it was part of something larger. The final act of a war that had consumed the world for 6 long years. We'd proven something important off Okinawa that day. We'd shown that American sailors, soldiers, and Marines could stand up to anything the enemy could throw at us and emerge victorious. Our ships were strong, our guns were accurate, and our fighting spirit was unbreakable. The Japanese could send every plane they had against us, but we would shoot them all down and still be ready for more. The war wasn't over yet. There would be more battles, more casualties, more young men dying far from home. But what happened off Okinawa on April 16, 1945, was a turning point. The Japanese had thrown their best punch at us, their most desperate tactic, and we'd absorbed it and hit back twice as hard. Standing there on the deck of the Laffey, surrounded by my shipmates and the wreckage of our enemies, I knew that we were going to win this war. Not because we were lucky, not because we were protected by divine providence, but because we were Americans. We were the sons of farmers and factory workers, immigrants and pioneers, men who'd grown up believing that freedom was worth fighting for and that democracy was worth dying for. The kamikaze attacks would continue for weeks, but they would never again achieve the kind of success the Japanese hoped for. Our defenses were too strong, our pilots too skilled, our resolve too firm. We would take casualties. Good men would die before this was all over. But we would never break, never give up, never surrender. As I write this now, decades later, I can still hear the sound of those Zero engines screaming down at us, still smell the cordite and burning fuel, still feel the deck shuddering under my feet as our guns fired salvo after salvo into the sky. It was the longest day of my life, but also one I'm proud to have lived through. We were just ordinary American boys, thrust into extraordinary circumstances by a war we didn't start, but were determined to finish. On that April morning off Okinawa, facing death from above in the form of desperate young men flying their planes like guided missiles, we stood our ground and did our job. 41 Japanese aircraft destroyed. 0 American ships sunk. The numbers tell the story better than any words I could write. The kamikaze tactic, for all its terror and desperate courage, had met American steel and American determination and been found wanting. The war would be over in less than 4 months. The atomic bombs would fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Emperor Hirohito would surrender, and the boys would come home. But on that day off Okinawa, we didn't know any of that. All we knew was that our country was counting on us to do our duty, and we didn't let them down. That's what I want people to remember about that day, not the horror and destruction, but the quiet courage of American sailors doing their jobs under impossible circumstances. We weren't heroes, at least not in our own minds. We were just boys from small towns and big cities, united by our love of country and our determination to see this thing through to the end. The kamikaze pilots were brave in their own way, but they were fighting for a cause that was already lost, dying for an empire that had brought nothing but suffering to the world. We were fighting for freedom, for democracy, for the right of people everywhere to live their lives without fear of conquest and oppression. In the end, that made all the difference. That's why we won, and that's why their sacrifice, however courageous, was ultimately in vain. We were on the right side of history, and history has a way of rewarding those who stand for what is just and good. The sea has long since claimed the wreckage of those Japanese planes, and the oil slicks have been washed away by tide and time. But the memory of that day remains, a testament to American resolve and a reminder that freedom is never free. It must be earned, again and again, by each generation willing to stand up and fight for what they believe in. We did that off Okinawa in 1945. We stood up, we fought back, and we won. It's a story worth remembering, a legacy worth preserving, and a lesson that should never be forgotten. The last kamikaze attack of the day came just as the sun was touching the horizon. A single plane, probably the last one his squadron could get airborne, flown by a pilot who knew he was making a one-way trip. Our radar picked him up, our fighters intercepted him, and our guns finished what the war had started. 41 enemy aircraft destroyed. 41 young men who would never see home again. It was a terrible toll, but it was the price of ending a war that had already cost too many lives. We didn't take pleasure in their deaths, but we took satisfaction in our duty well done. That night, as I cleaned my gun and prepared for the next day's watch, I thought about the letter I would write to my family back home. How could I explain what we'd been through? How could I describe the sound of aircraft engines screaming down at us, the sight of burning planes falling into the sea, the feeling of knowing that our ship's survival depended on our ability to shoot straight and think fast? In the end, I decided to keep it simple. We'd done our job, we'd protected the fleet, and we were all coming home when this war was over. That was enough for them to know, enough for me to be proud of. The war in the Pacific would continue for a few more months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Japanese had played their last desperate card and lost. American power, American resolve, and American fighting spirit had carried the day. We were just a destroyer on picket duty, one small ship in a vast ocean. But we'd stood firm when the test came. We'd looked death in the eye and never blinked. We'd done our duty as Americans and as human beings. That's the story I want to tell, the memory I want to preserve, not of hatred or vengeance, but of courage and duty and the price of freedom. We paid that price willingly, and we'd pay it again if we had to. The sea remembers everything, they say. If that's true, then somewhere beneath the waves off Okinawa lie the remains of 41 aircraft and 41 young men who died believing in their cause. We honor their courage even as we celebrate our victory, because in the end, we were all just boys caught up in something bigger than ourselves. But we were American boys, and that made all the difference.